Welcome to the world of HeroQuest, a place unlike any other. Whether you've just looted a dusty relic from your parents' attic or reclaimed a battle-scarred set of minis from the secondary market, nothing strikes fear into the heart of an adventurer like the silhouette of the original HeroQuest Chaos Warrior. With his massive curved horns and that impenetrable armor, he remains the undisputed iron-clad champion of the old-school dungeon crawl. He was the ultimate gatekeeper, a wall of cold steel standing between your party and the exit. He's the reason your wizard trembled behind a stone pillar and your barbarian reconsidered his life choices. Today I'll walk you through, step by step, the restoration of this legendary servant of Zargon. This is the Fair Weatherman. Be warned, dipping your brush to paint this relic transforms you back to your living room floor. Surrounded by cardboard furniture and a mountain of plastic miniatures, you'll be that same wide-eyed wonder you once were as a young dungeon adventurer. To paint this warrior is to reclaim a piece of your own childhood. Today, we're going to ignore the modern slap chop method and channel the high contrast magic of the 90s. We're talking just enough grime to prove this battle-hardened warrior's been stalking these flagstones for 30 winters. Pour a glass of heroic brew, ready your wet palette, and let's get ready to transform this tiny slab of plastic into a miniature masterpiece. As you can see, when I sit down to paint, I pretty much use a handful of the same brushes during every session. I have a dry brush that I use, it's a number 0. A really small fine brush for all of the highlighting in the eyes, as well as a number 0 brush that I use to just lay on my base coats of color. I also utilize a Citadel Warhammer water pot that I picked up quite a number of months back. It's seen better days, but it works just fine to clear off the old paint. So once I get my wet palette set up, I'm going to go ahead and lay on a thin dry brush of dead white. Being careful not to lay it on too thick. This is key if you're going to lay down a slap chop method of paint, which I haven't had a chance to experiment with yet, but I do find if you thin out your paints, you can still recreate the shadows and highlights with your standard paint. Next, I'm going to put down some ultramarine blue on the armor, being sure to thin it out so it goes on smoothly and still gives me a bit of contrast. During these first initial steps of putting down your base color, you don't have to be too neat about it. I do like thinning the paint so it goes on a little bit smoother and still allows for a bit of contrast. I end up searching online, either Google or Facebook, to try to find an inspiration pick. Most of the time I end up picking something way out of my painting league, but I do find it helps to push myself to get better with every miniature that I paint. Today I found inspiration from a Chaos Warrior painted by Stuart Thomas of the Stuff of Legends. I really like the blue Chaos Warrior and thought he would look neat alongside my other minis on the table. Of course, I'm going to make it my own throughout this process. It does help if you have an inspiration picture to start from, so that you can avoid any careless mistakes that you might make along the way. Painting is a wonderful part of this hobby where you get to be crafty and find your own unique painting style throughout the process. Next, I'm going to put some stone gray down on the axe. I plan to lay down some elfic flesh on the left-handed glove. Very iconic to the way this miniature was painted back in the late 80s. Keep in mind that all of these things will be shaded with a wash. So you don't want to start your color out too dark, knowing that it's going to get a little darker as you go. I'm also going to put that paint down on the boots. While I paint, I'm constantly mentally preparing for the next phase, planning ahead the next step of the process. One of the most beneficial hacks that I found online was the use of these Vallejo game washes. I found myself early on utilizing a lot of Citadel Agrax and Nolan oil, and I remember watching a video where someone had showcased using the black game wash and the sepia game wash to interchange the more expensive Citadel washes with. Not only do you have the black and the sepia straight out of the bottles, but you also can mix the two in equal parts and end up with a pretty comparable Agrax earth shade. I did keep the pots that I had from my last purchase of these washes and just refilled them in these bottles and kept the larger bottles in a closet that I can then take out and refill when I need them. If you are already accustomed to using the Citadel washes, you'll find that the Vallejo tend to be a bit runnier, but they do provide a pretty decent effect. If you plan to paint up a lot of miniatures, I feel like this is the best way to go. Here you can see the difference between the gray Chaos Warrior that I'm painting. The next process is laying down some beastly brown on the handle of the axe. It's the first step that I'm going to take to make that axe look like it is battle worn, as well as the top ball on the horns of our Chaos Warrior. Be sure you do a good job of cleaning off the remaining paint on your brushes. Here I have a slightly darker brown I'm going to use on the top half of the axe. And as you'll see throughout this process, my plans kind of change, and I think I ultimately decided to paint the top black. Be sure you utilize your smaller brush to get into those more recessed areas of the miniature. I'm going to go ahead and paint the inside of the helmet here before we lay down our first coat of Agrax, or at least my new Vallejo mixture of it. So let's go ahead and muddy up our glove, the boots, giving it a more battle-worn look. I really like how this wash gets into the crevices of the glove and then allows a little bit of dimension. So during this process of painting this blue one, I'm also on the back end painting 3 others. Something I like to do is batch paint quite often, allow one to dry while I'm working on the next one, and by the time I get back around, I'll be able to continue to keep moving forward. Sometimes I'll bust out a blow dryer and from a distance try to dry them off a little bit quicker if I'm in a hurry. Next I'm going to take out some Dragonov Nightshade and give a nice wash to all the ultramarine blue that I previously put on there. Just let that wash work into the crevices, allowing some contrast, giving some shading, and then we'll go back and add some highlights here towards the end. I really wanted to stay in the blue family when I shaded this down, just to emphasize the unique color that I painted this Chaos Warrior. Just to get a bit of darker contrast on the blue compared to the boots and the glove. I went back and added some Nolan oil, or the black Vallejo game wash. Once that has completely dried, I mixed up some white into that ultramarine blue and created a slightly lighter color to go back over all of the higher areas on the miniature. Anywhere the light touches from above, I try to hit with a little highlight. The inspirational picture I used for this Chaos Warrior had a very unique yellow pinstriping, and so I'm being careful just to lighten everything that I also know is going to be painted yellow on top. I find that highlighting is key to really making your miniature stand out in a unique way on the tabletop. It's very classic 90s miniature painting from Games Workshop. And I really find that it is my favorite part of the painting process. And just to be honest, I made mistakes. You're going to make mistakes when you sit down to paint. You're going to paint something one color, let it dry, and realize that's not what you really wanted after all. And that's okay. Having the wet palette allows that paint to stay ready to be used, oftentimes a day or two later, so I can easily go back and apply that paint color over any mistakes that I've made, clean up any areas, change anything last minute without any major redoing. One thing that I am getting used to doing now is just stippling, freehand drawing on the miniatures. It's been about a year since I started painting, and I've done about 60 miniatures at this point. So I do feel comfortable enough to kind of ad-lib as I go, not needing a tutorial online while I paint. An inspirational picture is usually good for me to just start going and see where it takes me. So here we're going to highlight the tops of the gloves around the axe. Looks pretty good for now. I think I'll let it dry and come back to it and see where we'll take it from here. Here I'm going to mix up a slightly lighter elfic flesh tone to just add a bit of highlighting on the top of the boots. Just lighting up any areas that need to be a little lighter, and still allowing that wash to set in and give us that two-toned look. We're also going to hit the tops of the gloves here, each one of the fingers intricately, adding a bit of drama in the shadows on the hand, still giving it the grittiness of the dungeon as well. And then lastly, you can go back and add a bit of highlighting on the top of the horns. All right, so once again, I'm going to go back and real carefully add another coat of black within the helmet here, as well as take some of the black wash and just apply a bit of shading on the axe. It's not quite non-metal metal. That's something I really haven't experimented with yet, but I do find if you pre-plan how you want your axe to look, where you want the dark pieces to go, where you want the highlights to go, you can get a really cool shiny effect to it with little to no effort. So now I'm going to go back with that sun yellow and all those areas that I had planned to stripe and utilize as pops of color. I'm going to hit with a small brush. Once I put this first coat down, I'll drop a tiny bit of gold metallic within this yellow paint just to give it a little shimmer. I know this isn't going to look super realistic, but I do like the contrast that the yellow provides against the blue. And most importantly, I'm going to add a bit of this yellow on the undersides of the eyelids of the helmet. Kind of make it look like a bit of war paint. And then all those little rivets in the armor I painted yellow, And then I'm going to go back and hit it with a little bit of an ink wash to make it look a little rusted, a little battle worn. So now that the axe is dried, you can go back and hit it with a little bit of white, kind of giving it a slight reflection of whatever light may be in the dungeon. You know, painting is all about layering the paint and giving it contrast. So if you know where you're going, you can kind of know what to leave for the next stage. Here I'll hit the top where the light would come down on it as well. Here's that ink wash. I really like to use this ink wash. Comes in handy. Here I'm going to apply that ink wash on the handle of my axe. And throughout the process I just really wasn't happy with the way the axe was turning out, so I just kept tweaking it and adding colors, changing up the initial vision. I'm also going to add a bit of that red wash on top of the rivets in the armor, as well as kind of the badges on the front of the armor as well, just to see what that'll do. I'm hoping it'll create a bronzing effect. Here I'm just cleaning up some of the ink that spilled onto the blue armor, as well as adding a bit of highlighting on the face of the helmet. And here I'm carefully going to add a bit of distinction between the bottom of the helmet and the eye slits. Here we go, going to add a bit of the silver metallic all over any of the metal parts, with the idea that I'll hit it back with a black wash here towards the end once that dries, as well as adding just a few shiny parts of the axe along the edges with the metallic. You can always stipple nicks and kind of cuts in the metal, just giving it a bit of highlighting. Here I'm going to wash over that red ink with some of the black wash, as well as the armor, the chain links of the armor. You know, anything that I sit down to paint, it's a process. You know, you change your idea midstream, you decide that color doesn't quite work, and so you have to retouch it up with something else. And that's okay. I mean, it's art, so it's your creation, it's your tabletop. You can do with your miniatures as you please. Once I darkened up with the ink wash, the handle, I went back and kind of lightened up the bottom of the axe, and then added a bit of highlighting back in there, just to give it a bit of dimension between all the colors. You know, during this process off camera, I'm also painting up the other 3 Chaos Warriors in completely different color schemes. Once all of those dried, it was time to paint the bases. And there's a bunch of different ways that people do bases. I've just found, I think Always Bored, Never Boring, he had a tutorial on how to do it. I changed up the color schemes a little bit from the advanced HeroQuest versions that he had, but ultimately the process is the same. I always start with painting the bases black, cleaning up any of the paint that kind of spilled out while I was hitting up the boots or any other part of the miniature. So it's nice to have a really clean base to start. And then the process is pretty simple. So with all of their bases primed black, I went ahead and added some stone gray, organically giving them some random stone shapes. The base choices that I've used for HeroQuest have been kind of grimy and gross. The next step, I'll put some black wash on top. And organically kind of just scraping off the excess and allowing a bit of differentiation of color. Just take a dry brush. Just do your best to kind of rub off some of the excess wash. You get a bit of shading in there. A very natural dungeon flagstone. After that's dried, I'll go back with that same gray and add just a bit of stippling, just smearing that color, adding a bit of highlights. Leaving some of the grime from the first initial stage as well. And then once that's dry, you can even add a bit of lighter white on top of that. And then follow it back up with just a bit of grime from the black wash. And then finally at the end, I'll just add a bit of stippling of black, of white, maybe some elfic flesh tones, making clear the cobblestone separations. I then took some red with a little bit of ink wash in there and add a bit of blood. This is your chance to really get creative. I took inspiration from looking at the HeroQuest game board and added some moss, small pebbles, anything to make it look unique. And then lastly, throughout my process of painting the original HeroQuest, I ended up taking a lot of these little skulls that I had an excess amount of, and at least one of the monsters within each set got a skeleton on it. My initial thought process was to give at least one of each monster a skull on it, so that when the quest book calls for a specific big bad Famir, in this case a Chaos Warrior, you can then identify that one on the board being that specific character. And make sure you rough up that skull and make it look like it's been in the dungeon for centuries. As the final highlight catches the edge of these iconic warriors, these miniatures are primed for battle, standing ready to once more haunt the corridors of your tabletop. A gleaming sentinel of chaos whose presence is missing from the modern HeroQuest dungeon. If you ask me, this miniature is iconic to the original board game. Painting these relics are more than just a hobby, it's a way to keep the torch lit for the next generation of dungeon delvers. Whether he's headed back into a foam-lined tray or straight onto the game board to terrorize your hero party, remember, the magic of this hobby isn't just in the pigment, but in the memories you'll forge at the table with your children. Your painting quest doesn't have to end here. In fact, it's only the beginning, as I plan to create more how-to videos this year. So if you like what you see and would like to see more, like this video, comment, and subscribe for more dungeon crawling content. If you found value in this tutorial and want to keep the torch lit in the corner of this realm, consider tossing a few gold coins into the coffer via Buy Me a Coffee. Think of it as a sponsoring of my next cup of heroic brew, as every bit helps me continue unearthing these relics and sharing the magic of this hobby with you all. As always, united the heroes stand, divided they fall. Come, let the quest begin.